And we're live. We're live with Dan Miller from Opus Research. Dan, thank you so much for spending the next half hour or so with me. Um, I appreciate it.
Well, I'm super glad to be here. It's been a
Wonderful.
long time coming. We have to talk things through.
Don't we? We do. We do. And so you are now located in New York City. We were chatting Manhattan, right?
Absolutely. I'm
Um,
in the Heights. So, yeah, you'll like this. So I lived in New York from 1978 to 1983, roughly, and lived down near right between the Village and Chelsea on 7th
oh,
Avenue. So,
nice.
uh, completely different. We moved back here, and it's 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 so new. So first of all, I went to graduate school up at 116th Street, which was about as far north as I'd ever been, and now I'm living at 181st Street, and it's just wonderful. New York is a different place, and I bring this up in the context of we'll have a lot to talk about in terms of the evolution, some real sea changes that have happened in our discipline,
Hmm.
voice services for one, but anything that relies on natural language understanding. But if New York can go from sort of this image of don't go in the subways, don't park your car without locking it, to
So,
hey,
yeah.
these days the Amazon deliveries, they just put them in the lobby of your building. I mean, nobody takes them,
And they
and
stay there.
they stay
Amazing.
there. And this is the hey, anything's possible. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
that's the overarching theme of discussing what's going forward with hey, voice
Yeah,
user
I,
interface
li-
and
I
voice
like
services.
I like the framing. I like the framing for sure. The future is something that you can't probably imagine, right? I mean, you couldn't have imagined back in the 70s. New York was pretty rough that it would
Yeah.
turn out to be, this amazing city. It's always been an amazing city, but a lot safer and so on. And then, so you went from New York, and then you jumped into San Francisco, right? Where you stayed a good chunk
Yeah.
of years, right?
36 years in San
36 years.
Francisco. Well, I moved out there to work for Atari.
For Atari, yeah.
Yeah, when it was the top dog in video games, but they were looking to diversify into some sort of telephone based services. So if you
Really?
can
Mm.
imagine, we formed a division called Atari Tel. And some of it was how are you going to teledeliver games and interactive stuff.
Mhm.
We did a whole kind of pre-tell me, pre all of these interactive, well, actually pre-SMS oriented stuff, just a way to do messaging without making the phone ring.
Mm.
And we just sort of looked forward to, and so this was in the 1983 to 1986 timeframe. We had a full business plan for telephony services from a big brand. So I've had a lot of time to think about you know what what a smart device that understands what you say could do. And my boss, um, he woke up one morning and he said, "Hey, we really need a service called Pinocchio. Nobody says Pinocchio, but we ought to have a device that sits in your room, responds to a unique word, and then
Really?
gives you your news headlines and all that." So
So that was when? That was in the 80s?
1985.
1985. So the vision
Yeah.
was there. And so it would be like a device that sits on your table perhaps, and you say
Well,
Pinocchio and it does things for
he
you?
actually thought it should be invisible.
Invisible.
You not invisible, but I'm sure Atari, with like an emphasis on industrial design and that sort of thing, would want something attractive. But his thought was more that there'd just be mics in the room,
Mhm. Mm.
and
Mhm.
just respond to your wake up word. But we were ahead of our time.
For sure, for sure. Wow. And so I'm trying to visualize the thing that you guys were working on. Was it I mean that you were working on with your
Uh-huh.
team? Was it a
Oh,
device or was
Oh
it
yeah, yeah. So the core. So there were two industrial designs firm. One was Porsche Design. So we had this really sleek looking screen phone,
mm, mhm.
limited display, touch tone keyboard, kind of cool handset. And yeah, so essentially a little wedge-shaped phone. We had another one, which I think that it was from a design firm called Norman Cousins and Associate, and it was a very late mid-century sort of take on what a phone ought to look like, and just a beautiful thing. So, but the idea, like I said, was some combination of something you talk to, something with a limited display. We hired dialogue designers back then to sort of think about, what conversations would look like with two 16-character lines in what looked like a LCD, and yeah, I'm looking over at my bookshelf over there. I still have some of the business plans and the service designs, and
Wow.
a lot of thought was put in to what my boss, his name was Christopher Wright, and he would go into a room and said, well, we're really talking about frequency of change and frequency of need in a matrix, and you can array what individuals are going to use frequently, and you can look at the volatility of the things that are changing, and you can categorize the type of services that people, and these are essentially information services, so it wasn't that distant from a news feed or a wire service or something like that. I mean, there were still faxes back then and all that, and we were just trying to think what a personal information center would look like. So Fawn and Fock, frequency of need, frequency of change, sort of still rattles in my head as sort of a useful guideline. But I mean, now that we're on the threshold of the metaverse, if I can use that term, we're sort of thinking more what's immersive, what is what do you actually live in, not what you interact with. And I'm a little troubled by that, but some things I'm constantly thinking about what was a good idea back in the 80s that stays meaningful as we look into how things skewed more towards not just immersive, but participatory and at the same time polarizing sort of services that are out there.
Yeah. And was it? I'm just trying to completely have it in my head. Was it? You plug it to the telephone line,
Yes.
right?
The
Yeah.
twisted pair. Actually, you'd love this too. So we had a crack team of engineers who came out of the games division. So they had a bunch of patents. One of them had done the initial Asteroids game. Do you remember Asteroids?
Of course.
So think of a really slow processor that was keeping track of a lot of objects moving in different directions and all that. So there was some really deep programmatic thinking going on there, and they looked at a phone, and I don't know if you remember this, but phones you still, you don't plug them in the wall anymore. But so there were like 4 prongs that represented what was called the twisted pair, that were the wires from your jack to the phone. So you think of some of these really deep thinkers in computer animation, what eventually became computer animation and all that stuff, looking at this hardwired thing, 4 wires in a plug, and say, why would they do that? but it did, all the the brains and intelligence did get hooked up to a phone line, and we were in the world of, we were just moving from 300 baud to 1600 baud, so there's some restrictions on just sort of what you could contemplate rendering. So having a limited display made a certain amount of sense. Relying on voice, incidentally, that's what we're here to talk about. But if you ever wanted to make the point that voice is more efficient than voice by itself is probably a more efficient and quick way to do input and output, we anticipated that there would be some hook up to moving video and that sort of thing, but we hadn't quite knocked that. But so some of this is settled law. But back then we were thinking, voice is going to be, the easiest and quickest way to accomplish things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that concept has been around forever, right?
Yeah.
It's just a hard problem to solve, and it's taken this long, I think, because of many reasons, but also I think because the problem itself is tough. It's very tough to as you well know, the vision, like enable having your AI detect what an object is through a camera, right? That's a much easier problem than speech recognition
Yeah.
or natural language, right? And people don't know that. They don't recognize that.
Well, it surprised me. We've
Yeah.
had discussions with, IBM and the Watson team going, for must be like 8 years now. And the early sort of application of Watson to discovery and recognition, it did seem like machine vision and pattern recognition, the, dog, not dog kind of
Mm.
exercises were ahead of sort of understanding intent, and
Hmm.
then matching it to your preferred results. So but actually acknowledge this. So my image of what's been going on is um, things happen very slowly, and by things, sort of advances in understanding and matching intent to the proper outcomes and that sort of thing, sort of trucked along. And you probably had discussions about there being the AI winter, or how many AI winters have there been between 1985 and today. But each time, it just it recovered. But starting about 5 years ago, things just accelerated. The
Yeah.
fact that processors got faster, that the models underlying understanding, or actually creating a better dialogue between people and machines. There've been just a lot of advances that accelerated just recently. So,
Yeah.
like I like to say, we were consulting throughout this, and we used to be asked, oh, what's like this kind of discussion, what where's it going, what's happening? And then just in the past like 2 years, it's been how do I not when will
Whether.
this happen. It's like, how do I do it now, and what
Yeah.
what makes sense. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a step back. Yeah, I mean, your official title is you're the lead analyst at Opus Research, right?
correct.
So, what does an analyst do? Uh,
Yeah, you love. So often I just say I'm lead analyst and founder. So I
Founder,
started
yeah.
Opus back in '86 when I left
Hmm.
Atari. I hung out my shingle, and the answer. So there's a generic answer to your question: what does an analyst do? And then there's like, hey, what did Opus Research evolve into? Which
Right.
is kind of like, hey, follow my mind. Um, but not to be glib. I think the purpose of an analyst is to have sort of a vision of the way things ought to be, or at some point in time, and then sort of analyze current events along some continuum that um, represent progress from where we're at now to how things ought to be. Now,
Hmm.
somebody, some of my friends from Gartner or Forrester would say, that's kind of a stretch. There's some disciplines in analysis that would use statistics or and surveys. But to me, it's still about hearing a problem or making an observation and seeing it along a continuum of outcomes, and then sort of helping to advise, helping to interpret what the marketplace is saying. Because okay, so there's analysts and there's analysts. I think Opus falls in the category of technology analyst
Hmm.
or technology marketing analyst. So our role is to be sort of what I call an interested third party,
Hmm.
observing behavior of individuals and the demand it creates for technology,
Hmm.
and look at the array of solutions, or technological solutions that solution providers. I know that sounds like a tautology, but the companies, and they fall into different, disciplines or verticals and that sort of thing. But the solutions that they're bringing to bear to fulfill on, customer requirements. Opus's turf, is around, well, I coined the term conversational commerce, but back at the year 2000, I was calling it conversational access technologies. And what we're talking about are the technologies that improve conversations between and among people. So that's just, hey, how do things that phones are becoming work better? And then there's people to machine. So that was sort of at the time, speech enabling IVRs, and what technologies improve, human language understanding and responding. That's the speech recognition side, and now it's speech recognition sort of informed by natural language understanding resources, speech analytics, and that sort of thing. And then human-like TTS. So how well does it respond, to encourage conversation? And then what's become increasingly important are the machine-to-machine conversations that have to take place, initially just to get rid of latencies, make the voice user interfaces seem more responsive, less lag, less air cons in the background as it look things up. But not more and more, it is, those APIs are connectors to back office systems. If you're an airline and somebody's just calling and saying, hey, when's the next flight to whatever, it should be able to look that up and respond. If it's an e-commerce app, how well, companies want to go from the search to find something you want to buy all the way to checkout and processing. So more and more there's automated systems that are getting invoked by increasingly robust speech apps, if you want to call it that. And so that's the sort of thing that we're monitoring. I know you were asking what an analyst does, but
no, that helps. Maybe you can tell me, give me like a question that a customer of yours comes to you for help to get an answer on. Like, say, hey, Dan, can you help us with this? These questions. Give us one.
Yeah, so I'll do one from way back when. So my first job out of business school was for a company called Link Resources. So in 1980, this company that is now part of IDC, but I was running something called their new electronic media program, and we were like I used to say we're like the Shell answer man for high tech firms. I had like 40 clients that were the leading advertising agencies, TV networks, movie outlets, publishers, cable companies, all having a question. What is the impact of these new communications technologies on my core business? So we get questions like, are video games a fad? And you'd have to sort of logic out how you'd answer that question at any point in time, and got into the latent need for entertainment and endorphin releases and things like that. Well, we think people are going to be gaming for a long time now. Or we get something really practical. There was a publisher that had this crazy idea of delivering local weather through satellites into addressable boxes in a cable network's head end. And they called up and said, we're leasing a transponder. We're investing in a transponder on a satellite. What's the that hasn't been launched yet? What's the likelihood of it failing? And so these are sort of random. And incidentally, that company became the Weather Channel, which then became weather.com, which now IBM bought and made sort of like Corda's stuff. So that's all interesting. So that there were pragmatic questions. More recently, and more germane to what you're asking. Fauna and FOC has not gone away. There's still core questions about and with that frequency of need, frequency of use model hasn't gone away, and we still get questions about, hey, what what services, I'm hypothetically, okay, I'm not naming, but if I'm a commercial bank that has a interactive voice assistant on my mobile device, what are the services that are going to be compelling, used repeatedly, and sort of justify our company's investment
Yep.
in this stuff. And there's classic models for measuring the effectiveness of a virtual assistant that aren't that different from what we said about IVRs, automating X number of inbound calls and queries. But these questions are very meaningful now. It's sort of like, if we Opus like to think that the virtual assistants we're covering will gain in popularity, because they work and provide rapid results for individuals that are using it. Meanwhile, if you're a retailer or somebody operating a large retailer, cable company, go down the list, operating large bunch of customer care associates, you'd kind of like to say, well, is this preventing calls going into our most expensive resources, the people?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we just sort of do studies of, hey, what is the impact? You tell us. What do they say about consultants? There's somebody that bars you watch to tell you what time it is. We do have to ask people, what have the performance measures been that you've been using? What has the impact been on the measurements that are useful to you? And then have you thought of maybe a different way of looking at the value here, and that sort of thing. We try to reinforce new perceptions that'll keep moving the ball along to maybe increased use of these interactive services.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that most of the business or most of the money out there are folks within the world that you work, are folks or companies that are trying to get the most out of their contact center or call center? Is that where most of the conversations revolve around?
Um, yes and no. I think contact center, and you even use the terms interchangeably. What started as a call center, or sort of the
Mm-hmm.
place where a lot of inbound and then inbound
Mm-hmm.
and outbound phone activity started, it has been transformed into this contact center. And then the contact center means that you still have agents, but some are doing chat, some are
Mm-hmm.
doing outbound SMS.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a number of things going on. So yes, there's a bunch of money going into resources that I call it, they're customer interaction management systems more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And they look across multiple channels. They support both text and voice. They handle inbound and outbound, but we like to think that the model is, don't think about it that way. Think about encouraging conversations, however they are initiated. So and this came up in a discussion with a client the other day. So there's something like all of these resources are sort of moving to the cloud. And by all of these resources, there's contact center, but gee, as long as you're up there, take for example, like Amazon Web Services has like contact center stuff that it calls Amazon Connect, but they have all this natural language understanding and speech and components that make for a virtual agent
Mm-hmm.
in their cloud. So that Lex is their speech recognition and NLU stuff. Polly is this human-like rendering of of text to speech. Under this Lambda sort of control panel, you can pull in connectors and APIs to all the sum of the world's knowledge. So more and more we're seeing the concept of a contact center just kind of cloudify and bring a lot more resources in. And right now people are quantifying that cloud-based contact center as representing like $20 billion in spending each year, but by enterprises. But what was pointed out to me last week is that there's something like 600 billion or some multiple of that's involved. And I probably got that number wrong, so don't write that down. I have it in my notes, but this was impromptu. But there's some big multiple of that's the people involved. So that the story of bringing value isn't, how much you're going to spend to bring AI or conversational AI into the talk path between companies and customers, as much as it is, what are you going to do to make this other investment I'm making either help shrink it or make those people more efficient? So what we're seeing right now is the application of natural language understanding, of pattern matching, of finding best answers, helping the customer care agents that you have. So that's something called Agent Assist. And then have the same resources inform, either, so bots. I hate using that term, but we're talking about, bots, either chat bots or voice bots that people are that the customers are interacting with. So does the contact center stay in the center there? It's a qualified yes. Is it your grandma's contact center?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So it has morphed. You're saying it has morphed, and so it doesn't make as much sense to talk about a contact center as such, right? It's very dispersed and so on. And if in a definition, but the bottom line definition really is, or the bottom line problem, the underlying problem has not changed, which is I have customers that need to be cared for, and there's technology out there that I need to leverage. There's too much technology, so I need to find somebody who at least can guide me, and that would be sort of you, right? You'd help them understand, what is a fad, what is not a fad, what is solid, what is not solid, given their use case. Maybe what are the tools, what hammer and what to pick up and so forth, right? More or less.
Yeah, I mean, people want to know what's working. How, so with these new technologies, which aren't so new anymore, they like to hear, what other people are doing, what's working, what problems to avoid, how to get started. And then, are there methodologies that represent sort of the successful development of a virtual assistant? That's a lot of what we're doing lately. And then we work a lot with the solution providers as well to help them hone their messaging, or help them understand the same deal. What works. What are their what are their clients? Be they large companies that staffed up with dialogue designers and computational linguistics experts and have their own staff to do these sorts of things. Those were sort of the early adopters and the first set of customers. But what you're going to see now, among solution providers that range from the core contact center people to the CRM folks, exemplified by Salesforce, and the pure cloud folks who are, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Amazon, IBM to a certain degree, each of them are trying to bring their solutions, from sort of pure IT into customer-facing resources that get used in real time to make employees more efficient, make customers more efficient, drive more sales. So we're seeing sort of the application we are trying to narratize the path from, hey, these are science experiments, to have computers understand what people say and give the right reaction, to, hey, these are systems that you put into place that are in the critical path between your customers and your cash register. And that's what we're seeing more of, is sort of this, tell us, like I say, what's working, what's going to impact our bottom line, either by helping us make more sales, retain customers, those pragmatic sorts of business objectives.
Yeah.